The alley. This happened to me when I was 15 years old. It's been a full 10 years since this experience took place, but I can never erase the final image of what happened from my memory. I was on vacation during the summer holidays. After having just given my O-level examinations, I had an extended break because of the gap between exams and results. Because of so much free time, my bedtime became after dawn and I took to taking long walks in my neighborhood before the sun rose. I'd grown up in the same area since I was born, so I was familiar with all the alleyways, which I used as shortcuts. One night, I decided to go out an hour before dawn. As soon as I left my house, I thought I saw someone walking into one of my favorite alleyways. I took a peek into the alley but saw no one. On the right side of the alley was a house that had been abandoned for well over a decade, and its windows were always boarded up. Figuring I just imagined it, I went over to my intended destination. After I had my fill with walking, I made my way back toward my house. It was almost time for sunrise. Unfortunately, I encountered a dog during my walk, and after running away from it, I ended up facing the same alleyway from before. I saw my house a little distance away. Before I could proceed, my sight fell on a man to my left. He was extremely large, definitely around 6 feet 5 inches, rather obese, with strong arms and a huge frame. Standing next to him, I looked like an easy prey to a massive grizzly bear. Needless to say, this man wouldn't need much effort to take anyone out. His face, though, wasn't as imposing as his body. It looked harsh, but his eyes were relaxed and the skin around his cheeks weren't hardened, so I didn't have any reason to think he was dangerous. The man looked winded. Being an unassuming 15-year-old, I asked him if he needed some help. He answered that he had made a mistake walking so far and would need a hand to get up. I obliged. That was my first mistake. As soon as I gave the man my hand, he used his other arm to wrap himself around me. I felt uneasy how forward he was. The man put his weight onto mine, and I realized the manner with which he had a hold on me would allow him to instantly sweep me up if he wanted to. At that moment, he had his hands grasping both my shoulders and his face was very close. I immediately regretted helping him up. Now I had no way of freeing myself. I made one effort to budge out of his hold, but his grip was so tight I could barely stand straight. The creepiest part, however, was the fact that I was certain this man was smelling me. I was sure of it. His face was next to my shoulder, and he kept taking in on sniffs of my scent. He motioned for me to move toward the alley, and said he would be able to walk once he was propped up straight. I didn't want any scenario where he was with me in such a tight alley, and used every ounce of my strength to stand him up straight. "There you go," I said, trying to keep my voice level and hide my fear. "You're up, so you can walk by yourself." I made sure to back out of the alley as I said these words. The man mumbled his thanks and turned away. I was about to leave when I heard him collapse in the middle of the alley. In retrospect, it sounds really stupid, but I didn't like leaving a person in pain in an alley, so I went back in to help him up. It was at this point that I realized my mistake. Before I could bend down to help, I noticed something next to me. The boarding on the windows of the deserted house was gone. Instead, I saw an endless blackness behind the gap where the window should have been. There was a sound coming from inside this opening, and I inched closer. Sticking my ear out, I heard the unmistakable sound of breathing. There was someone in there among the darkness. Then, I heard a different sound. It were the raspy breaths of more people, and these sounded like someone whose mouth was full of gurgling water. I dared to look up and retched in terror. There were 3 people standing there. All 3 of them were extremely thin, so skinny I could see the shapes of their skulls against their bald heads. Their eyes were puffy and red, as if someone had muffled them to the degree that they could only be one shade in color. What truly scared me was how delighted they were to see me. Their mouths were stretched into wide smiles that showed off sparkling teeth in the darkness. Their puffy, red eyes were filled with dangerous glee at the sight of me. The three people looked in anticipation for me to join them as their heads turned in unison. It was then that I saw the large man. He was now on his feet. The pain he was in before was gone. He stood inches by my side, the same gleeful smile on his face as the three skinny people inside. His eyes looked hungry, as if he couldn't wait to get things started. In a low, shrill voice that was so feminine I would never have foreseen coming from him, the man spoke. "Come, join us. Don't you think it looks like fun?" He giggled, the same way a shy girl would giggle. I saw the other three people. The shortest one of them had drool dropping down his chin. "It's a lot of fun. I promise you'll like it," the large man said gently, his huge hand lightly stroking my hair. I bolted out of there as fast as I could. My senses were all aflame. I ran straight in my house and waited. For some reason, I wanted to see if those people would leave the alley. After a couple seconds, where I held onto my excruciatingly nervous breaths, I saw the faintest outline of the large man peeking from inside the alley. I was far away from him, but for one terrifying second, I thought he saw where I hid and had this strange, delighted smile aimed in my direction, as if assuring me he would wait for me there. Coincidentally, my family only stayed in the neighborhood for a few more months before we shifted to a house a substantial distance away. I never returned to that alley. Even over a decade later, I still wonder if that man and those three people are still there. Silently waiting, their eyes still filled with that twisted sense of glee that another person would join them, maybe forever. The apartment. My best friend from college, Irfan, had moved in the city with me. His apartment was just a few blocks away from mine, and we'd see each other on frequent occasions. Within the first several days, though, all Irfan could talk of was his apartment. He complained he heard voices around the house, how he felt there were people watching him even though he'd searched the entire place and found nothing. When I suggested for him to switch places, Irfan said he couldn't because his health was failing him. And he was right. I'd never seen him look so gaunt. His eyes had started to sink in those dark bags under his sockets. The hair was now frizzled as if he'd taken to pulling them. Most of all, it was how Irfan now looked constantly sick. Every time I saw him, I expected him to vomit uncontrollably. It looked like he was about to break in fits any second, carrying himself as if he found his own body unnecessary weight. "It's the apartment," he clattered his teeth as we sat talking. "You gotta see it to believe it." Will you? Will you? Come on, will you?" Irfan was positively wrangling the scruff of my shirt as he pleaded for me to accompany him. After I voiced my apprehension, he took to banging his head on the table. "No, no, no. You're supposed to understand." Irfan grabbed my arm tight. Seeing how manic he'd become, I agreed to see if there indeed was an intruder at his place. When I arrived at the apartment, it was in shambles. All the furniture was scattered, propped up to appear like Irfan was expecting a bomb to explode any minute. The walls had carvings on them, a couple spots so deeply dug through that I could see the other side. A stench of rotting eggs wafted around the room, although I could find no leftover food. Irfan ran over to the dug-in wall and poked his head through it. "I think I can hear them," he waved a hand from behind his back while remaining in the same position. "Shut up. Listen. That sound of crashing waves from above," he rattled on, attempting to shove his head upward in the opening he'd made. "It's because of them." The next moment, Irfan fell back clutching his gut, crying out unintelligible words. He writhed on the floor, convulsing as loud gurgling sounds escaped his throat. I heaved him up and forced him to bed. I thought he was acting this way on purpose, especially when I gave him water and he just spat it out as if it were poison. He begged me to stay for the night to prove he wasn't making it up. A few hours later, I was woken. As I came to, I was met with the sight of Irfan brandishing a hatchet above me. His eyes were incensed with murderous desire, and his teeth were bared with maddening intent. But he didn't attack. Instead, Irfan flung the hatchet at the wall, unable to penetrate the pipe that was exposed out of it. Enraged, he pounced at the pipe to punch it with his bare fists when he again clutched his gut in pain. As I brought a glass of water to his lips, Irfan snatched it and tossed it at the pipe, where the glass shattered into pieces. His eyes searching around the room in a frenzy, Irfan tore open the front door of his apartment, bellowing out curses. "I know where you are. I'm going to kill you." He roared at the ceiling out in the hall before flailing his arms around and taking off down the corridor. The last sight I caught was the back of his shoe as he turned the corner and ran out, after which his cries of rage dissipated as the seconds passed. I'd hoped he'd return the next day, but there was no sign of him. Nobody had heard from him, nor did anyone see him exiting or entering the building. It was like Irfan had walked out of the universe itself. Reporting to the police didn't produce much results. I was told to wait for him to return. They wanted me to stay at Irfan's place in case he turned up. The first night went by in a haze as I paced the apartment, while the remaining hours were spent lying on the couch and remembering his descent into madness. I was parched, as if the heat had been turned up, and gulped down water to keep this sensation away. I was woken up by the sound of footsteps, or at least that's how I could have called it. I didn't know where it came from or if it was real, but the sound had been beating against my ears before I'd opened my eyes. The apartment felt boiling up again. I felt around for the glass of water I kept drinking the night before. That didn't help, so I opened the front door to let some fresh air in. I saw the neighbor gesturing how he had a lot of water too and was fanning his face. I was too weak to respond and lurched back in the cell-like apartment and fell on the couch. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the time. What felt like a couple minutes later, I drifted off for almost half a day. I forced myself to eat something through the nausea, but the food began burning in my stomach. I fell back on the couch as the pain spread like a flaming torch had been placed inside me, setting my inside ablaze. I drank what felt like all the water there was left in the tap, but was too weak and collapsed on the floor. Again, it was the strange noises ringing in my ears that brought me back to consciousness. It terrified me into believing bees were swarming in my face, trying to fly into my lungs. I couldn't leave the apartment. I was tied to it by an unseen force. My eyes would dart around for the origin of those alien noises I could never place, my insides swirling with water. On the floor, I could see stacks of hairs I'd ripped out of my skull. I was convinced there was someone else responsible, someone who seemed to live in the walls. I seized the hatchet Irfan had used and began tearing the insides of the wall, screaming for the person spying on me to appear. I bellowed my lungs out, and in my rage, flung the hatchet across the room, which struck the exposed pipe. It burst with a blow, sending water spilling into the room. My thirst knew no bounds, and I fell to the ground and licked as much water as I could when it hit me. Whoever it was calling me out. They wanted me to find them. I knew it. I was certain. I knew now. I knew for sure. With an insane clarity overcoming me, I tore open the front door and flailed myself across the corridor, running like a madman. As I neared the water tower, a stench approached me. It became stronger the closer I reached. The miasma enveloped the corridor as I traipsed forward, nausea overcoming me. I could swear I felt claws gripping my body. I saw an enormous vat of water at the center of the room, with a spiraling ladder that led to the top. Gallons of water gurgled on the floor, some of which splashed and bathed me in red. It dawned on me what color I was soaked in. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't water. Not all of it. Oozes of dark murky red swirled around where there should have been aqua, moistening my skin with the substance that was meant to run in someone's veins. Even though I realized I wasn't going to like what I'd see at the top, I took one trembling step after another along the ladder to reach the point where the vat's entry opened. As I looked below, all my questions were answered. I found Irfan. Only, it wasn't all of him. My knees buckled as I let out a cry of horror as I saw floating limbs in that sea of blood. Irfan's semi-submerged body, only his right arm and torso remained attached to his head, bobbed up and down by the edge. There were at least 2 more pairs of arms and legs, all chopped up and dropped in there as if someone had prepared a sickening feast. Before I could let the trauma of watching my best friend's mutilated remains stare up consume me, I heard a rustle on the platform. I wasn't alone. "Oh good, you're here." That was faster than I thought. It was a shrill, cackling voice, but one that was very familiar. I slowly turned around to see Irfan's neighbor beam at me. His casual attitude almost mistaking me into believing as if we were there for a friendly meeting. In one hand, he carried a large spade, which was bathed in murky red, not unlike the one I was dripping in. In his other hand, the man had in his grip another man's dismembered thigh that he merely flung in the vat, where a horrible whizzing sound proceeded. "Have you been enjoying the water?" The man's voice dropped low, although his bare teeth gave away his sense of hunger. "Your friend must have tasted familiar." By the corner of my eye, I saw the bloodied water being directed into a pipe I was certain led to Irfan's apartment. This man had been making him then me drink the contaminated water filled with his victim's blood. He noticed me wandering, cackling as he raised the spade and held it in both hands. "Want to take a closer look at your friend?" The man pulled his arms back and swung the weapon with brute force, looking to knock me in the vat of water with the remains of Irfan and the other victims. However, I managed to avoid the blow, causing the killer to lose his footing and fall in the vat himself. Knowing this was my only chance, I thundered out down the ladder and out of the terrace as the sounds of the man splashing in water were left behind. Once I started running, I didn't stop. Not until I'd escaped the building and reached the nearest hospital I could find, where I spewed out all the disgust and blood I consumed for days the moment I felt safe. I directed the authorities over to the building, where they found the killer's body in the tank he'd fallen in, drowned in the same vat of water he disposed of his victims. A search of his apartment had resulted in the man's various former crimes coming to light. He was a serial killer who drifted to different cities and scoped out his neighbors before contaminating his target's water supply, luring them to the water tower where he murdered and dismembered them. I found out that consuming blood for longer spells at a time leads to hallucinations and hysteria, which explained why Irfan had lost his senses as the days had gone by. I'd met with the same results by staying at his place and drinking the same water that had contained Irfan's blood. I'd been drinking that which had run through my friend's veins without knowing it. The thought made me sick to my soul. I moved back to the small town I'd grown up in. I never want to live in the city again. I don't know who or what to trust anymore after witnessing my best friend and many others meet the most horrific deaths I could have imagined.